It's all over the news. The Prime Minister has revealed that the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee was set up 2 months ago. Names have also been tossed about, rumoured to be on the PAP slate of newcomers. And we also see opposition parties walking the ground. Short of an actual announcement, all signs point to the general election in a few months' time. The proverbial ball has started rolling. Results aside, how will the next GE be different? More specifically, should the conduct of the general election need to change in any way? Is it sufficiently fair and transparent and seen to be so by the electorate? Do we not want to know more about the candidates, their personality, not just what the parties stand for? Is the way the electoral boundaries are redrawn and communicated fair enough to all contesting parties? And does it give rise to speculations of gerrymandering? Are there grounds for the perception of biased reporting by the mainstream media, and does it have an unfair advantage over the digital media, especially during cooling off day? Is the election deposit unnecessarily prohibitive? How can overseas voting be made easier in terms of process and access? These are but some of the issues and concerns that Singaporean voters have, arising from the last general election in 2011. We believe that this is the right time for them to be raised and discussed robustly so that the government is listening and can take them into account and make the necessary changes to ensure that people's trust in the GE remains high. Welcome to Debate IQ. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. Today's Debate IQ topic is next GE, what do we want to see? With me on the panel is veteran journalist, you can tell from his grey hair, it's not touched up, PN Balji. Balji has more than 30 years, actually I think it's about 50 years of experience as a reporter and editor. He was also CEO and editor-in-chief of Today newspaper. Balji also held editorial positions in the Straits Times and the New Paper. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Associate Professor Eugene Tan of SMU, affectionately called Eugene. Eugene is an expert on constitutional and administrative law in Singapore and has written extensively on national policies and spoken as well. For 2.5 years, from 2012 to 2014, Eugene was also a nominated member of Parliament. Welcome, Eugene, and we'll probably seek many clarifications from you on constitutional matters. Also with us is my good friend Calvin Cheng. A former nominated member of Parliament, Calvin's day job, which he claims he has, is in the media and fashion business. A lot of his time is spent overseas, but he continues to share his views on politics in Singapore. And from his Facebook page, it's clear we either love him or hate him. Calvin, I hope you live up to your reputation. Be provocative, please. Our final panelist, Dr. Derek Dacunia. Derek was a senior fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, where he led the Regional Strategic and Political Studies program. A long-time observer of Singapore elections, he is author of 2 books on the subject: The Price of Victory, the 1997 Singapore General Election, and Beyond and Breakthrough, Roadmap for Singapore's Political Future in 2012. Derek, I'm delighted that you've been able to join us. Thank you for making time. Our studio audience comprises Singaporeans of all ages. I was going to say all sexes. Both the mainstream media is here, as well as representatives of the online media. So, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Let's make this debate matter, right? So let's not do what we don't want done. Let's not self-censor. Better still, let's not censor. All right. Before we launch into the debate proper, here's a quick look at a video clip we put together to set the stage for the discussion. Parliamentary Elections Act. Parliamentary election in Singapore is governed by the Constitution and the Singapore Parliamentary Elections Act. Elections are administered through the Election Department, which comes under the Prime Minister's office. The electoral process During the entire electoral process, the Parliamentary Elections Act contains provisions for the lead-up to and conduct of elections. Pre-election. The Prime Minister appoints the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee, headed by the Secretary to the Prime Minister. The committee's report is then submitted to Cabinet. This does not need to be debated in Parliament. The updated boundaries are published in the Government Gazette. And shortly after, the Prime Minister will call for the general election and Parliament is dissolved. The President issues a writ of election. Notice of election. The returning officer issues the notice stipulating the date, time and place for nomination. Polling date is announced. Polling must occur between 10 and 56 days after nomination day. Nomination day. Nomination papers have to be signed by the candidate, a proposer, a seconder, and at least 4 assenters. Candidates must place deposits set at $16,000 each. Contested constituencies are announced on nomination day itself. Campaigning. Campaigns can begin as soon as contested constituencies are announced. Historically, in Singapore, campaigning lasts around 9 days. Cooling off day. This started in the last election. Cooling off day starts at 12 a.m. the day before polling day. It is a day when campaigning is banned and election advertising is not allowed. Election reporting is only allowed in the mainstream media, and this includes party political broadcasts. The blackout extends to online news sites and the social media accounts of candidates and political parties. Polling day. On polling day, ballot stations are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. After that, ballot boxes are sealed and sent to counting centers. Overseas votes are cast on the same day at 10 polling stations abroad. Results. The results of the election are usually announced on the same evening. When counting is completed, a candidate is declared the winner. A recount can be requested if the difference or the margin is less than 2%, in which case the overseas votes will be factored. Balloting slips are destroyed unless the President orders otherwise. Now here are some facts about the last general election, which was held in 2011. It had nearly double the total number of candidates compared to the previous election, which was in 2006. There were no walkovers except for Tanjung Pagar GRC, unlike in previous elections. The total number of eligible voters in GE 2011 was nearly double that in GE 2006. And in 2011, a total of 7 opposition parties contested 94.3% of the parliamentary seats. Now that's 82 out of a total of 87 contested seats. Perception of unfairness. Now, despite increasing competition, there are still perceptions of a lack of fairness and transparency in the conduct of the general election in Singapore. And these perceptions include a lack of transparency in the redrawing of electoral boundaries, the lack of independence of the Elections Department, which falls within the purview of the Prime Minister, the difficulty of smaller opposition parties in meeting the minority representation requirement for GRCs, and Singapore having one of the highest electoral deposits in the world at $16,000 per candidate and as much as $96,000 per GRC, which will be forfeited if you fail to get at least 1/8 of the votes cast. And a perception that the mainstream media's reporting favors the incumbent. The Institute of Policy Studies conducted a post-election survey in 2011. 2,000 people were polled. The survey found out that there was a desire to retain the existing election system, which received a score of 3.31 out of 5. Perceptions of fairness of the electoral system also received a score of 3.53 out of 5. However, in both cases, new or first-time voters registered lower scores than older voters, reflecting relatively lower satisfaction with the system by the younger generation. What do Singaporeans want to see in the next GE? IQ spoke to some Singaporeans And this is what they had to say.
Where they come in. So their impact on the election is that only they come for a few days.
I think particularly for the last election, there were quite a lot of new candidates. So it'll be great if we really know who they are. It kind of feel like, you do not know them. They just suddenly just pop out, and some of them, finally become minister.
The best is the live debate because it's a public. People like us can voice up what is we really need from them.
The other thing I would like, now with social media, I wish candidates would really make full use of it and publicize what they're about, what they believe in, and what they're aiming for when they stand for election. If they put in a bit more effort, I don't think having information on candidates is a problem, but it all boils down to the party and the people themselves.
I think we need to see candidates out on TV, out on the streets doing live debates, because that will put them to the real test and the public can scrutinize them as well. Because if it is just based on rallies, which are all scripted, I don't think the public will get enough information. It is all just what they want to say, but what we want to ask, we might not get that information.
Perhaps I'll start with Balji. You've been in journalism since 1970, if I'm not mistaken. My question to you is, do you feel that over the years, in terms of the conduct of the general election or even the by-elections in Singapore, the various by-elections, do you think we have progressed or regressed?
I'm not going to answer your question directly, right? Because it's not a question that can be answered so directly. So I'll try and be faithful to my conscience. And
give a qualified answer.
And no, it's not a qualified answer. I try to give you an answer which says that I think, and I'll make it as short as possible, but if you want to ask me more, go ahead. And that is, at the end of it is the perception of the public, right? And I think the perception of the public is we have hardly moved forward. And I think that's a sentiment, right? And you put up a list of unfairness,
Perceived.
Perceived unfairness, you're frightened of a legal tangle.
No, because,
can be sued,
libel
right?
suits and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, we have a good friend here sitting on my right.
I don't think he's going to come to my help.
We'll take care of you.
I'm here to rely on him.
No, that itself is quite a long list, But I think it's not an exhaustive list.
No, it's not.
There's many more, And I would just, if I want to shorten my answer, I would say the barriers against opposition are still high, right? And some of them you have put up there, election deposits, which have gone up. And I think one of the other things you also mentioned was, in one of the clips there, is the cooling off day period. Why is it that the mainstream media can report on cooling off day but not social media?
Yeah.
Why? So there are many, things like this. Although I must say that attempts have been made to try and narrow the gap, but I think the gap is still wide.
And what might be some of these attempts or areas where there has been palpable improvement?
I won't call it palpable. Improvement, yes. I think I would say that, if I'm not mistaken, was before the 2011 elections, the PM announced a larger number of single seats. I think that's a good way forward, because in a sense that the opposition had a harder time trying to get people together, and four or five or six.
And also, I guess, in terms of the amount of time given between the report, the submission of the report of the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee and the dissolution of Parliament, in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, it was 1 day. 1 day.
2001.
2001, if I'm not mistaken, was 1 day between the report being tabled and the dissolution of Parliament. The last election, I think it was more than 50 days. It was 54 days or so. So I think in some of these areas, there is a certain acknowledgement, that you have to be seen to be fair.
2001 was the 9/11, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the PAP cashed in on that.
Yeah,
The
and
government cashed in on that to get a solid vote, you know.
Yeah, and Eugene, you highlighted in one of the interviews recently, I mean, you highlighted what PM said in Parliament, right, recently. He said, and I quote, he said, to the maximum extent possible, we will make sure that there is enough time elapsed so that everybody can read the report. He's referring to the electoral boundaries report. Understand it and know where they stand before elections are called. I mean, this is a clear commitment. But as to what constitutes enough time, and that's debatable. But clearly, he is highlighting that they recognize the importance given to time for the participating candidates. Comment.
It's clear PM recognizes the importance, but I think the question is to what extent, would he give effect to that? Because to the maximum time possible, is it in his assessment of what is good for the ruling party, or is it in his assessment what is good for the electoral system in Singapore, for the population in general? So I think that there will be the expectation that he will live up, to some extent to his assurance.
I mean, the benchmark set in the last election was 54 days. Surely you shouldn't go below that.
I feel that yes, it will be to the ruling party's advantage, to give as much lead time as possible. I think increasingly my sense is that voters are a lot more sensitive to perceptions of unfairness, and they will compensate, in their own ways, with regards to perceived unfairness. So I think it is important, for there to be as much time as possible, because I think, the PAP shouldn't have to rely on these sort of advantages. Right?
They shouldn't have to. And Calvin, to what extent do you agree with Eugene that for today's voters, issues such as fairness, transparency, are a lot more important, especially the younger voters, the first-time voters, compared to more materialistic, utilitarian factors?
Well, I think that for the younger voters, definitely fairness and transparency are more important. But I don't think that's the important question, because I think fairness and transparency are relative. So whatever one deems to be fair or unfair would vary from one person to another. So for example, the discussion here was about the time between the report and the dissolution of Parliament and how much lead time you gave to the opposition. I saw on Facebook quite a few comments on various mainstream media Facebook pages and so on, that some people were saying that were commenting that the opposition shouldn't be crying foul about the lead time, because if they were serious about serving the people, they should be doing it for the last 4 years rather than waiting for the electoral boundaries to be announced. I know that technically that has problems. I'm just highlighting that the perception of fairness.
You can't just say that has problems. That is serious problems. I mean, why are you playing that down?
I'm giving you. I'm quoting the verbatim comments on these pages. I'm just saying that perceptions of what is fair and what is unfair may vary from person to person, right? So even if these issues are important, how we actually meet the standards of what is fair and unfair, I think that's a different
So
debate altogether.
I'm asking you, since you are the youngest among us here, and the assumption, which is increasingly sounding unreasonable, is that you know the ground better than us, the younger ground.
No, I'm just giving you verbatim the kind of comments on Facebook. But if you want to ask me about
I'm asking you for your stand on this. I mean, your opinion, Calvin. Do you think that the ground, especially the younger voters and first-time voters, do they put a lot more value? I know I'm generalizing, but I'm asking you for your opinion. Do you think that they put a lot more value and weight on issues of fairness?
My opinion on first-time voters, the younger generation, is that I think that they do value fairness and transparency more than the older generation, but I don't think that's the important question.
Okay, never mind. I'll decide what's the important question. But thanks for your opinion anyway. Thank you. Derek, I saw you shaking your head as Calvin was saying. Is it in a disagreement?
Mostly in agreement with what he said.
Exactly.
Sorry, what were you?
No. So what's your view on this? How do you think election trends have changed over the years? This is one of the areas that you study.
Yes, definitely is one of the areas that I study, but I try to put things in particular context. And when I read things in the online media, I am rather dismayed that people tend to, in my opinion, draw certain incorrect conclusions. Like, for example, there's this notion of the protest vote. What exactly is a protest vote? Mm-hmm. Okay, a lot of people were vesting significant importance on the result of the Hougang by-election and the Punggol East by-election. All right. The fact that they are called by-elections is not an inconsequential matter. By-elections are essentially an occasion to cast a protest vote against the establishment. It is a phenomenon that you will see in jurisdictions around the world.
Because there's no real risk of...
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's no real risk of the government of the day being displaced.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even include the fact, I would even include the presidential election in that mix, because the presidential election is although it's now we have an elected presidency, but the powers are very limited. It's not going to upset the apple cart insofar as the governance of this country is concerned. So presidential election in Singapore, by-elections in Singapore are all occasions for Singaporeans, if they want to cast a protest vote against the incumbent. If I can go back to 1991, where Mr. Cham Si Tong brilliantly engineered what was supposed to be a full-fledged general election into a by-election by getting all the opposition parties to contest just by one seat, less than half the seats contested. He essentially turned a full-fledged general election into a by-election. So a lot of people said, fine, we will view it as an opportunity. Since the government is not a threat, we will view it as an opportunity to cast a protest vote.
So are you saying, Derek, that in a general election,
Yes.
a full-fledged general election,
Yes.
Such as the one that's coming, that voters tend to vote more conservatively?
Absolutely.
With the head?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
They would feel free to risk it a bit more in by-elections. As I say, the key phrase
Even
here,
if the government is delivered on nomination day?
on nomination day.
If let's say there are
No,
walkovers.
on nomination day is not a full-fledged parliamentary general election. Then it becomes.
No, what I mean
by
is, if, as it used to be the case, on nomination day, because of the number of walkovers,
Yeah.
you know that this is the government, right?
Right.
Even then, you would say that you're saying that the voters in a general election would vote more conservatively.
For the most part, but this is where it comes back to your initial point about the trends and the changing trends now. So the fact is that we in Singapore are following what is the universal trend and how elections are conducted in Singapore and how the voter is becoming fairly typical of voters around the world. We will see by-elections as essentially a key phrase, occasion to cast a protest vote against the government. So that's why I was rather dismayed that a lot of people were vesting too much importance on the conclusion of the by-elections. You cannot extrapolate from those results and think that you will get a similar result in a general election.
So Calvin, you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
But can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I just jump in? 2011 elections. Would you consider that election where there were many protest votes?
Okay.
It was a general election. The People's Action Party could have been voted out. They had a historic low, post-independence, 60.1 percentage of votes. Lost GRC with 2 ministers, at least one of them very high powered. Would that be would you? And also there were other seats that were on the margin that they nearly lost. So would that also, or was it just one-off incident?
Okay, you have to really drill down into the actual figures to answer your question. In the 2011 general election, there were 4 main opposition contestants to the PAP, and the spread of vote between the opposition parties in the straight fights, except there was only one 3-cornered fight in Punggol East, but the rest are all straight fights between the opposition parties and the PAP. You had a vast spread between right at the bottom, SDA, the umbrella organization comprising the PKMS and the Singapore Justice Party, getting around 30% of the vote, and right at the top, Workers' Party getting more than 46.6% of the vote. Okay, so then you go down from top to bottom. This is the wide spread. Now, to answer your question about protest vote, I did the calculation as to what exactly was the median protest vote in the 2011 general election. To calculate the median protest vote, since there are 6 parties, it's very easy to do that. You knock off the 2 at the top and you knock off the 2 at the bottom, and you average out the 2 in the middle, which happen to be NSP at the top and SDP at the bottom. And you average out their percentage vote, and the protest vote was about 38%. Okay, so what does that actually, that's the median protest vote, 38%. So what does that tell you? That tells you that any party in that election that got above 38%, their percentage above 38% was no longer a protest vote. You know what it was? It was a pro-party vote.
Okay.
And you cannot win elections in Singapore on the basis of a protest vote because of mandatory voting, which is another subject altogether, which I'm sure we'll discuss it later.
Okay, let's, was there something you want to say?
Go ahead.
I think it's a good time for us to throw it open to the floor. Yes?
Eugene, can I start off, please? Now, with boundaries being drawn and redrawn over the years, leading to perceptions of gerrymandering, why is there no system of checks and balances, for example, appointing the judiciary or some independent body to offer some level of fairness so that public perceptions can be improved?
Or an ombudsman?
Constitutionally.
No, I agree. I think, we have developed, and I think it's time for us to seriously look into the question of how we can promote electoral fairness. It's a question I raised in Parliament, and here, we see ourselves, trying to take advantage of the Westminster model. But even then, UK is moving away, right? So UK have now gone on fixed election schedules, right? So it's not, at the prerogative of the Prime Minister anymore. There are also clearer rules as to how electoral boundaries are to be drawn. So I think here we need to move away, right, from a system in which the incumbent has tremendous say. And I don't see, why we should continue with that system, because, arguably it's not broken, but I think, for me, elections are also important because it will help to engender
legitimacy and trust.
Legitimacy and trust, for people with regards to the political system. And so we don't want people to feel marginalized in the electoral process. After all, what elections about, right? It's really about electing your representatives, you know. So I fully agree with you.
Who else feels strongly about this point? You know, since the issue of electoral boundaries and redrawing, the amount of time given to the opposition parties, even the basis of and the considerations behind some of the decisions in the redrawn boundaries, you know, the level of transparency. I mean, any thoughts, any further thoughts or views on that?
For example, the last elections, I think a single constituency was taken away and carved into a GRC. That is manifestly unfair, and perhaps these sort of things could be dealt with in a better way.
Okay, so I think another issue that the panelists haven't touched on yet is the fact that EBRC also also defines the GRCs and also selects the race of minority candidate who must be represented at in that GRC. So I don't know whether you think that's something that, do we even need the GRCs to ensure minority representation? And if we do, shouldn't there be a more transparent process of essentially assigning a race to a particular GRC?
Can I just jump in?
Okay. Yes, please.
Yeah. I think one thing that's quite important, of course, it's up to you to decide whether it's actually important or not. It's the difference between fairness and transparency. In terms of how you actually demarcate the electoral boundaries and who actually demarcates it, we can look at the various systems around the world. So it's either political appointees or politicians, because there's really nothing in between, right? So at the end of the day, even if it was an independent judiciary, right, or an independent commission,
or whatever
these people would still be appointed by politicians, because at the end
you're suggesting that in name they could be independent, but there would still, you can't rule out the possibility of influence behind the scenes.
Absolutely, which is what happens all over the world. But transparency is a different thing, right? Yeah. So even under the current system, right, I think what's lacking is transparency.
Yeah.
So that gentleman over there was saying that carving out an SMC from a GRC was manifestly unfair. I think he would feel less so if they gave reasons why they was actually carved out.
Yeah.
So I think it's less important. Of course, it's up to you to decide whether it's important or not.
Such a sensitive man.
Whether
sensitive new age man.
What the constituent of the committee is, whether it's political appointees or politicians, then the transparency of the entire affair.
Yeah, and I would like to quote what Sylvia Lim, chairman of Workers' Party, said about the Electoral Boundaries Review Committee and the process and about gerrymandering. And I quote her, she said, "The entire electoral boundary redrawing process is completely shrouded in secrecy, chaired by the Secretary to the Cabinet. There are no public hearings, no minutes of meetings published, no attempt to explain why certain single seats are retained while others are dissolved, nor why new GRCs are created or old ones reshaped."
Right.
It goes back to your point about explanation.
So if they had demographic facts and figures to justify, for example, the changing boundaries, that would help.
I mean, need not even just be demographic. There could be other considerations. But the question is, do you feel that these considerations are sufficiently articulated? I think there were some attempts to explain, but were they sufficiently articulated? Yes, please, Vignesh.
I just wanted to ask make a quick statement. You know, the words fairness and transparency have been thrown around a lot, and Calvin mentioned that fairness and transparency are very relative. I like to disagree with that. I think we have to certain standards, and those standards have to be met in an election. So now the question comes up, and it's very scary that Calvin mentioned that we appoint an independent judiciary, which is appointed by politicians, for example, to draw the election boundaries and the line. And they can be influenced by politicians. I really hope our judiciary cannot be influenced by politicians. That's a very scary road to go down. But my point here I want to make is that when you talk about the fairness and transparency, should we not come up and discuss what exactly are the minimum standards that have to be met? And are these standards being met when election boundary lines are being drawn, when discussions are being made? So the issue also boils down, how do we justify why are new boundary lines being drawn? And is there a necessity to put that into writing, to put that into our laws and our constitution to ensure that fairness and transparency is preserved at least at a minimum standard?
Yeah, And in some jurisdictions, there is a requirement that it must be announced at least 6 months ahead, or the previous election, and then effective in the next election, and so on. There are different conventions, you know. But I think the issue of fairness and transparency, I wouldn't want us to go into a semantic debate on fairness, but I think we get the point that the two are not
the same.
Are not the same, but they are
Related.
quite related, quite linked in this particular case. Balji?
Yeah. No, I think I agree with your point of view. I think there has to be more clarity, you know, in how you come to that decision, you know, and it's very strange. And when you don't, when the perception is that it's secret, it's being done by a select group of people. We don't even know who the names of these people. Social media has dug up the name of the secretary to the cabinet. You know? It was not released officially. But when it's so shrouded in mystery, that's when the suspicions come about. You know,
even if the intention.
I don't know what the intention is. I can't speculate on the intention because I don't know.
But what I'm saying is, even if the intention was not ignoble.
Yeah,
you know?
maybe. But again, you know, I mean, even in the latest announcement in Parliament, it was a surprise for many people, or some people, that the PM said, "I've already formed the committee." When a precedent had been set in 2011, when he actually said it's going to be formed. So why? Why this, I won't say, I'm not sure it's double standard. Why do it this way? Then immediately the suspicion, people begin to suspect. You see? So I think that is something that they really have to, to
yes,
look at.
Derek.
Yeah, can I just inject a slightly different note here? I am less concerned about this issue of transparency and fairness. Virtually every electoral division is intended to be a microcosm of Singapore, in terms of every single demographic, whether it's race, religion, language,
socioeconomic,
class, structure, and so on and so forth. Okay, so and within this broad general principle, there are always exceptions. And the last general election, there were two exceptions. One was Juchat SMC, which was all private housing. And the other one is Holland Bukit Timah, where you had a relatively higher proportion of English educated and the upper middle classes relative to the national proportion. So these were the two.
Derek, I think we understand that. We accept that. We understand that, and I think a point is made. I guess the general feeling here is, even if it was not intended to disadvantage the opposition, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. The one thing that's coming through is there is definitely a need for greater transparency, if not fairness, transparency in the considerations behind the decisions made.
The consideration is very simple. It's population shifts.
But why not make it
But make it clear.
Right?
Make it clear. Because they are clearly, surely there are considerations beyond just that. Those could be umbrella considerations. But there are various other considerations that have been articulated before, you know, in terms of the size of the GRC. You don't want it to be too large. So what I'm saying is there's a spectrum of considerations, and those considerations actually vary from division to division. So what we're saying is, I guess we're in agreement that there can be and should be greater articulation of these considerations and greater granularity in the articulation of these considerations.
And I think it's important to also have a thought experiment of how this would actually hurt the ruling party, and I don't think it will in any way to explain the reasons why. I mean, at the end of the day, gerrymandering happens everywhere in the world where constituencies are divided by geography, right? So and whether it's electoral commission or judges or everything, as long as constituencies are divided by geography, gerrymandering happens, right? It's just a matter of being more transparent about the process of the justifications, and then maybe people will have fewer complaints.
Eugene, do you think that's necessarily true, that gerrymandering happens as long as you have electoral boundaries.
Well, if you have to draw boundaries, I mean, the question is how do you draw it?
Absolutely.
And I think here, what we can sense is, it's not just the outcomes that are important, but also the process. Right? And I think that there is the consensus in the room, right, that there's a need for the EBRC to be more engaged. So we know population numbers are always the sort of generic explanation, but they need to go beyond generic reasons. I mean, how do you explain, for example, Bredel Heights as being part of Marine Parade GRC? Right, it's close. The nearest source of water is the MacRitchie Reservoir, rather than East Coast, the beach off East Coast. So I think it's this sort of. I think it tends to cut voters off from the electoral system, right? Because people do identify, with the sort of constituencies that they are in.
Yeah.
Right? How do you explain, to a Bredel Heights resident, you're part of Marine Parade?
Basically, it reduces the chances of speculation, speculative conversations. If you can actually come out and be a lot more clear about why were some of these things. I mean, until today, people are asking, why is Serangoon not part of Marine Parade? Why is parts of Bukit Timah part? Why is Holland Village part of Tanjung Pagar and so on? But it's because it's not been clearly articulated, and once it's articulated, if the considerations are valid, people move on, So, okay, why don't we just agree? Yes, please.
Yeah. No, I just want to add as well, I completely agree with you, Calvin, on transparency. And I think there's lots of questions about millennials and new voters and first-time voters, having a lot of this perceived notion that things are unfair, and that's true because millennials especially, I'm not sure about the rest of the other generations, but speaking as millennial,
you're making yourself sound like some kind of a marsupial or some kind of an animal, millennial. Okay.
Like a wombat.
Okay, wombat.
Yeah, but speaking as I guess in that generation, right, we are always searching for questions, and information is at the tip of our fingertips, more so than I would presume any other generation. We live and breathe social media, we live and breathe information from other sources, from our friends and all of that, and the thing about that is that, a single question of, why is that, a single question of doubt when shared across social media gets hit, very rapidly, very quickly, and it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
And so that's especially for this generation, for my generation at least, transparency is at the utmost importance. If we don't have questions, we don't have the answers to those questions, or we can't find them readily, then that's when a lot of doubt occurs, and that's when we question, especially, why don't we get these answers? What's wrong? Where is the cover-up?
And skepticism could actually lead to cynicism.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Subhash.
Okay. I just want to raise something. I believe in the coming election there will be a lot of new and young voters as well. And I had a chance to vote for the presidential election, and I personally observed something. The ballot slip has been serialized. So I don't foresee it is pro-PAP voters that are voting to say that, we have to support the party. I believe they are being by force to vote individually. The reason behind it, if I vote against the government, what will happen to me if in the event, if I need to seek assistance from them? Will the assistance be granted? Like say for housing or any other matters?
Do you have that fear, personally?
Personally,
or concern?
Okay, personally I feel yes, in one way. Because when it's being serialized, it's like you are being forced to vote for the ruling party. But if it is not being serialized, then a greater opportunity will be given to choose the party of your own.
And you feel this way even though, this question has come up in virtually every election so far, and government has come out quite clearly, or the government has come out quite clearly to say, that's not the case, your vote is secret.
And the
over
opposition,
and over.
And the opposition,
and the opposition
has
too
agreed.
has said it.
Yeah.
So my question is, in spite of those assurances by not only the government, but also some of the key opposition parties in some of the election, you still feel, you still have that concern and doubt?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. How many of you, just as a simple show of hands, how many of you share this concern about the serial numbers and are concerned that somehow your vote could be used against you?
Because I mean, my
No,
point
I
of
just
view
want to show a show of hands, a quick show of
serial
hands.
numbers,
How many of you have that fear or concern?
I mean, to make sure it's
Okay, not that many, but a few. Okay, yes.
Yeah, my point of view of this serializing the ballot paper is that if you don't serialize it, what will happen is that there may be what we call this ballot stuffing. There may be these possibilities. Now, I mean, so far, I don't think we have this problem yet, but if in time to come, another party take over and then they are not doing very well, and they may just do it, because without any serial numbers, we can just stuff the boxes. So serializing of ballot papers has a need. The most important thing is that the so-called election, those who do the counting and all that, do not what they call this, record anything. They do not record this number, this party, that number, that party, and things like that. So, sorry, yeah.
I wish to add on to that. My personal experience, when I was at the ground, the moment when I issue my NRIC number is
No, when you say ground, you talk about polling day.
Polling day.
Oh, okay.
To vote.
To vote.
vote
Okay.
with the ballot slip. My NRIC number is stated against the counterfoil, and we don't understand why there's a need for.
I don't know. I still have a very different experience from you, Subhash. I actually felt assured, because I know that when that ballot slip is issued to me, my name gets struck off against the so-called register, and that register, the opposition candidate, representative, as well as the, I mean, all parties candidates can see. So if you ask me, I actually feel a lot more secure, right? And if you look at how the ballot papers are sort of treated after counting is done, they're kept in the Supreme Court vault. The seals are all there, and after 6 months, when it's time to dispose, candidates are invited to see that the seals are unbroken. I actually feel quite assured, So I think I was quite gratified, that most of you didn't feel too concerned about the serial numbers. I felt quite secure actually, because I know that there are only so many ballot slips. No one can insert additional ballot slips.
Sorry, if I can jump in.
Yep.
Actually, based for international surveys, even in the US, up to 30 or 40% of voters actually said their vote could be traced if somebody wanted to. So actually, it's not an unusual phenomenon, because many people, like it or not, many people can be quite cynical about the political process. So they may not have full confidence in the government, and so it happens everywhere. But the difference, of course, is that in the US, people say that, but everyone assumes that there will be no recriminations. In Singapore, a lot of people do seem to me to be to treat politics as a taboo for historical reasons, fairly or unfairly. So I think the real issue here is that the only reason why people are so concerned about secrecy of the ballot is that there's this climate of fear. So once we decide that there is actually shouldn't be a climate of fear, and if we believe that actually there's no recriminations, it doesn't really matter. I mean, historically, people used to vote in open too. Public voting. So I think the issue with ballot secrecy really has to do with eliminating the climate of fear.
Your point is we can't ignore it, even if it's only 30% who may feel that way. And it really means that the government needs to continue to give the assurance. There's nothing more you can do, because the serial numbers, as Wailun said, the serial numbers actually, this is the government's explanation, do serve a purpose, a functional purpose, to prevent stuffing of ballot boxes and so on. There are many other considerations. So, but the assurance is important. The continued assurance.
It's not just assurance from government. It's as the panelists have said, it's a perception. Voters' perception has to be that they have the right to vote and that they will take up their right.
Sure.
I mean, if you don't take up the right, nothing's going to change.
Okay, point taken.
But I think
if I could just jump in here, I think this thing about stuffing ballot boxes is not a very credible argument. I mean, all of us who voted in the last election, I do not know what was your particular experience. I voted in West Coast GRC and I went to the polling station. The elections department official was like about 2 feet away from me and eyeing everything that I was doing, including dropping the ballot. So the idea that one can stuff ballot boxes may have been an argument that was retailed by the government years ago, but is not very credible. The second point is that about 7 or 8 years ago, in Malaysia, they did away with serial numbers on ballot papers. Okay, to reassure. The other point that some of you have raised, that to get the government to reassure people that you don't have to worry about, is counterproductive. The moment you are focusing on the serial number, you're actually enhancing people's fears and consciousness about this thing. So please don't talk about it. That's what I would argue.
The most important point is that so far.
A microphone. Sorry, we need you to have the microphone. Otherwise, it won't be recorded. Sorry, yeah, Samula. Okay.
I mean, the main point is that so far, I think I've been I've been voting for so many times already, that no opposition party ever complained that they're cheating, that there is,
electoral fraud.
Playing, electoral fraud and things like that.
No, but I don't think the issue here is about opposition complaining. That's more.
So because they are the most interesting.
No, the most interested is the voter.
I don't want to lose an election.
Well, the most interested is the voter. The voter must not fear, must not have that fear, even if it's residual. The voter must not have that fear if he's going in there.
Yeah.
But aren't we peddling this fear? I mean, if we look at the votes, are Singaporeans really afraid?
I don't know.
I'm just concerned that, in
no,
an
just
audience
because
like
you
this,
and I are not afraid doesn't mean the rest of them are not.
But I think, in a way, I agree what Derek says, to constantly assure people that they have nothing to fear. I think we might be getting people to to wonder what's happening, right? And I would expect an audience like this to be a lot more mature and discerning.
Why?
Why
you were
should
picked by you? You're mature and discerning.
Were there any recriminations? I mean, if you look at how Singaporeans voted, right, and if there were any recrimination is done at a collective level, which will then, of course, result in a payback, to the ruling party when the time comes. So to me, I think we should not be peddling fear.
Okay.
I think the fear is there.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough.
The fear is there, but I feel that over time that fear has gone
down. Yeah.
So what does that mean? Even with the present system, that fear has gone down. If not, alternate GRC would not have happened. Yes. Right. First point. And I'll just give this anecdote and I'll stop here. 2011 elections, I was out, talking to as many people as I could. I had no full-time job, so I had a lot of time. And this fruit seller in Tekka Market, my favorite fruit seller, what he told me stuck. He said, I'm going to vote for opposition, he told me when I asked him, very point blank. I said, no lah, I think you will just say it, but you will vote. He said, no lah, I will, with this hand, I will take all the goodies that the PAP give me. With this hand, I will vote opposition. And he said it very loudly. And I think that, to me, was a point when I said, I think the fear in Singapore is going down.
No, I would agree with you that the fear is going down generally, even by the show of hands, but we cannot completely ignore the concerns that are few. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
yes, please.
I think it's disconcerting that we are even fearing to talk about the fear. That why can't we talk about that? That is an important issue. If the electorate feel that I don't want this ballot there so I can have the peace of mind, then we should be able to do away with it. And changing gears a bit, I'd like to ask Eugene Tan about the 30% deviation rule. Because even if the electoral boundary is how you delineate and stuff, the 30% deviation rule gives a lot of playing gap for how to maneuver the boundaries and stuff. And I think there's a big issue about representativeness with the 30% deviation rule. How do we address this issue? Is there any way as citizens we can ask our MPs, to be more representative?
Correct. I mean, one of the things that puzzled me was why the opposition didn't pursue this matter, during the time, during the current term of Parliament. The 30% deviation rule means that, you see, how the EBRC divides, I think as most of you know, is that they work on a ratio of 1 MP to about 26,000 voters, right? And so there is that 30% deviation, right? So a SMC could be, 30% higher than or GRC could be 30% higher than 26,000 times how many, or 26 or 30% lower. I think that I've written before that margin is just too big because you could result in a 6-member GRC having the same number of voters as a 5-member GRC, or you could have voters who are underrepresented and voters who are overrepresented, right? Because if you have a small constituency like Potong Pasir, right, 18,000 voters, they have 1 MP, and then you have Bukit Panjang or Sengkang West, which now has 39,000, and they also have 1 MP. So I agree. I mean, the deviation rule needs to change, and I think it's something which, under the current system, the Prime Minister has to take the lead, in directing the EBRC to work on a smaller deviation rule. But I think pressure needs to come from the ground, and MPs need to take it up as well, whether it's opposition or NMPs.
For me, the larger point here is this. These are technical issues, right? And they're complex issues, right? But it requires continuous articulation so that people actually understand the principles governing those issues. I mean, they're not just about numbers you pluck. There should be a reason why the 30% was decided on, right? And people need to understand why 30%, why not 35 or 25%, why 30%? I'm sure there is a rational argument behind it. But if people are not, if this is not persuaded, people are not persuaded by it, and there's not enough discourse on it, then my concern is it could lead to cynicism or even conspiracy theories and so on. So some of these things need to be explained, articulated. It could be laborious, but this is the job of government. Yes?
In the view of not self-censoring, I'm going to ask a very simple question. Why do we have to redraw election boundaries every election? With the 30% deviation rule, we are a small country. You do not have huge waves of internal migration from Sengkang to Woodlands, right? So why are we actually having this conversation? Why not address the root question? Why do electoral boundaries have to be redrawn and reset at every election? Why not say every 15 or 20 years? Give it, of course, a reasonable period of time.
It's a good question. Good question. Howard, did you have a similar question?
No, I just wanted to point out that because someone mentioned about stuffing the ballot box, I was just thinking. I mean, feel free to make it clear for me. If you have mandatory voting, would that really be an issue at all? And the other thing is in terms of fear. I think it's got less to do with the serialized number, but certain benefits and fear that people have. I think Marot was the one who basically came out with this survey that basically said that a lot of civil service people fear voting against the party, and I think these are some of the concerns that we have to address as well.
Sure, point taken. Can someone on the panel address the earlier question about why do we need redrawing of electoral boundaries every election? Why is there need to go through that exercise? Anybody would like to respond?
Well, I think it's an excellent point.
Thank you.
We are not, we don't have geography like mountains and rivers and all, right?
And major migratory patterns.
We're very much flat. So I think it raises a valid point. And of course, when you think about, I suppose now with the terms of reference that the PM gave to the EBRC for the average size of the GRC to go down to below 5, perhaps some redrawing might be needed. But I think you're certainly right. My sense is going forward, there should be fewer and fewer changes, right? We shouldn't be seeing boundaries change at every election because that confuses people. That takes away, the ties that people have, with where they belong to.
Just to wrap up this part of the conversation, would you say that there's actually nothing wrong with having a review, but it does not always have to result in a major redrawing? A review is always good, just for a committee to come together and ask some important questions. Is there anything that requires us to do some changes? The answer could be in the end, no, there's no need to change
again,
it.
it comes down to transparency. There may be valid reasons, right? So, for example, new towns being
towns,
built, especially during the time where Sengkang was undergoing a major transformation. Those were valid reasons, right?
Yes.
Just one point. The fact is that we are going to have a huge influx of new migrants into Singapore because of the population white paper. So it is inevitable that we are going to have,
But that's a planning target, no?
That's what they say is a planning target. That's the rhetorical policy. What the operational policy is, we don't know. So the thing is that there's going to be a lot more new citizens in the years ahead. So we have to expect some degree of changes in the electoral boundaries. I think the basic point is that instead of us urging the government to have more transparency and fairness, it will come about naturally when there are more opposition MPs in Parliament. Then it is even in their government's own interests to explain why it wants to do certain things that way. It will come about that way. And not rather through the case that we are just urging the government to be transparent. It's all about political power at the end of the day.